The house stood at the end of a wide road lined with tall trees and silent gates. From the outside, it looked like a place where nothing ever went wrong. The walls were white and clean, the windows always shining, and the lawn was trimmed every single morning. People in the city often talked about this house with admiration. They spoke about wealth, comfort, and a perfect life. But inside the house, not everyone felt that comfort. Every morning before the sun was fully awake, a woman arrived quietly through the side entrance. She wore simple clothes, always clean but old, and her shoes showed signs of long hours of work. She worked as a maid in the house. She cleaned the floors, washed dishes, ironed clothes, and made sure everything looked perfect before the owners came downstairs. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice was soft and careful. With her came her young son. She had no one else to leave him with, and the job barely paid enough to survive, let alone afford childcare. The boy stayed close to her, carrying a small bag with his things inside. He was thin, quiet, and had eyes that noticed everything. He never ran around or touched anything without permission. He understood, even at his young age, that this was not his home. The house was often filled with noise, but not the kind that felt warm. There were voices of guests, the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors, and laughter that echoed loudly. People came dressed in fine clothes, talking about business deals, trips, and parties. To them, the maid and her son were almost invisible, like part of the furniture. The boy spent most of his time sitting in a corner of the large living room or near the kitchen doorway, waiting patiently for his mother to finish her work. He never complained. He watched. He listened. And most of all, he noticed the piano. It stood in the living room, large and black, with a smooth surface that reflected light like a mirror. To the boy, it looked magical. He had never seen something like it up close before. Sometimes guests played it during gatherings, pressing the keys without much care, laughing when they missed notes. Other times, a hired musician came and filled the house with music that floated through the air and settled deep in the boy's chest. Whenever music filled the room, the boy forgot everything else. He forgot that his clothes were worn, that his hands were rough from helping his mother, that people barely noticed him. His eyes followed the movement of fingers across the keys. His ears tried to remember every sound. He didn't know the names of notes, but he felt them. Each one told a story he somehow understood. The maid noticed her son's love for the piano. She often found him tapping softly on the table, pretending it was a keyboard. At home, they lived in a small room with thin walls and very little furniture. Once, someone had thrown away a broken toy keyboard near their building. Some keys didn't work, and it made strange sounds, but the boy practiced on it every night. He imagined it was the piano from the big house. She worried about him, not because of his dreams, but because she knew how the world worked. Dreams like his often ended in disappointment. Still, she never stopped him. She believed that hope was the one thing they could afford. The woman who owned the house rarely noticed the maid's son. She was used to being the center of attention. Her life was filled with luxury, praise, and control. She liked things done her way and had little patience for anything that didn't fit her idea of perfection. To her, the presence of a child in the house was an inconvenience. She noticed him one afternoon when she was walking through the living room with a group of friends. The boy was standing a little too close to the piano, staring at it as if it belonged to him. She paused, her expression turning cold. She asked the maid why the child was always there. Her voice was sharp, not loud, but firm enough to make the maid feel small. The maid apologized quickly, explaining she had no other place for her son. The woman sighed, clearly annoyed, but said nothing more at the time. From that day on, the boy felt her eyes on him more often. Not with curiosity, but with judgment. He tried harder to stay out of sight. Still, the piano pulled him in like a magnet. As days passed, preparations began for a large gathering. The house buzzed with activity. Decorations were placed, food was prepared, and staff moved quickly to meet high expectations. The maid worked longer hours, her hands aching by the end of the day. Her son stayed quieter than ever, sensing tension in the air. On the evening of the gathering, the house filled with guests dressed in shining clothes. Laughter and loud conversations filled every corner. Music played softly in the background. The piano stood ready, polished and perfect. The boy stood near the edge of the room, watching. His heart beat faster than usual. He didn't know why, but something felt different, like the air itself was waiting. He looked at his mother, who gave him a tired but gentle smile. It was a look that said, "Just stay close." He nodded. As the night moved on, someone played the piano casually. Notes floated through the room, but the playing lacked feeling. The boy listened carefully, his fingers moving slightly as if playing along in the air. He didn't notice that a few people were watching him now. The woman of the house followed their gaze and saw the boy again, standing there, completely lost in the music. A small smile formed on her face, but it wasn't a kind one. An idea was forming in her mind. She tapped her glass gently to get attention. The room slowly grew quieter. People turned to her, waiting. Her eyes moved to the boy. She raised an eyebrow and spoke in a playful tone that carried across the room. She pointed toward the piano and made a comment that caused soft laughter to spread among the guests. The maid froze. The boy felt his face grow warm. He didn't fully understand the words, but he felt the weight behind them. The room waited for what would happen next, unaware that this moment was about to change everything. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after the woman's words settled in the air. Some guests smiled, some looked confused, and others glanced at the maid and her son with interest. What had started as a casual gathering now felt like a small stage, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The boy stood still. His hands felt cold, even though the room was warm. He did not fully understand why people were laughing, but he understood that he was the reason. His heart beat fast, and his ears rang softly. He looked at the piano, then at his mother. The maid felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She knew that tone too well. It was the kind that pretended to be playful but carried sharp edges. She lowered her head and took a small step forward, ready to apologize again if needed. She wanted the moment to pass quickly, to return to being invisible. But the woman of the house did not look away. She was enjoying the attention. She repeated her comment, this time louder, making it sound like a joke meant for everyone. A few guests laughed more openly now. Others shifted in their seats, unsure whether to join in or stay silent. The piano stood between them like a challenge. Its black surface reflected the lights above, calm and untouched. The boy swallowed and spoke softly. His voice was almost lost in the large room, but it was clear enough. He asked if he could try. That simple request changed the mood. Some guests leaned forward, curious. Others raised their eyebrows, surprised that the child had spoken at all. The woman laughed lightly, as if amused by his courage. She waved her hand toward the piano, giving permission in a way that felt more like a dare than kindness. The maid felt fear rise in her. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to pull him back and leave the room. But when she looked at her son, she saw something she rarely saw in such a place. She saw calm. She saw focus. The boy walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, but his mind was clear. The noise of the room faded as he reached the bench. He sat down carefully, his feet not quite touching the floor. The room went silent. For a brief moment, doubt crept into his heart. This piano felt different from the broken keyboard at home. The keys were smooth and cool. He placed his fingers gently, remembering the sounds he had stored in his mind over many quiet nights. He took a deep breath and began. The first notes were soft, so soft that a few people thought he might stop. But then the sound grew stronger, clearer. The melody was simple, but it carried feeling. It was not perfect, but it was honest. The guests exchanged looks. Some straightened in their seats. A few stopped smiling. The boy's fingers moved with care, guided by memory and emotion rather than training. He played the tune he loved most, the one he had practiced again and again on broken keys. In his mind, he was not in the big house anymore. He was back in the small room, late at night, playing quietly so he would not disturb the neighbors. The maid covered her mouth with her hand. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She had heard him play before, but never like this. Never in a room where people listened. The woman of the house slowly lowered her glass. Her smile faded. This was not what she expected. She glanced around and saw that the room was no longer laughing. The music filled the space, touching places people did not expect. It carried longing, struggle, and hope, all woven together in a way that could not be taught. When the last note faded, the boy's hands stayed on the keys for a second longer. Then he lowered them to his lap. He did not look up right away. The silence felt heavy. Then someone began to clap. Slowly at first. Another followed. Soon, the room filled with applause, louder and longer than anyone expected. The boy looked up, startled. He did not understand what was happening. He looked at his mother, who was crying openly now, no longer caring who saw. The applause made the woman of the house uncomfortable. She forced a small smile and joined in, but her claps were stiff. She had lost control of the moment. People began whispering to each other. Questions filled the air. Where did he learn to play? How long had he been practicing? Was he taking lessons? The maid wiped her tears and answered quietly when asked. She explained that her son had never had lessons. He learned by listening. He practiced on a broken keyboard someone threw away. Music was the one thing that made him forget how hard life was. Some guests felt a knot form in their stomachs. They remembered how they laughed earlier, how easily they had joined in. The boy stood up from the bench and stepped away from the piano. He felt tired, but lighter. He had done what he could. He did not know if it was enough. The woman of the house cleared her throat. She made a comment about the boy being lucky and talented, trying to regain her playful tone. But it did not land the same way. The maid gently took her son's hand, ready to leave the room if asked. She was proud but also afraid. Pride had never protected them before. The millionaire, who had been standing quietly near the back of the room, finally stepped forward. He had watched everything without speaking. His face showed something rare for such a man. Thoughtfulness. He looked at the boy, then at the piano, then at the guests. He said nothing yet, but his silence carried weight. The gathering continued, but it was no longer the same. Conversations felt forced. Laughter sounded thin. The boy sat beside his mother, feeling the room differently now. People noticed him. Some smiled warmly. Others avoided his eyes. The woman of the house watched from across the room, her thoughts racing. A joke meant to lift her status had turned into a mirror she did not want to face. And somewhere deep inside the boy, a small door had opened. He did not know where it led, but he felt that his life had quietly shifted, even if the world around him had not yet caught up. The gathering slowly moved forward, but the feeling in the house had changed. People still talked, glasses still clinked, and soft music played in the background. Yet something invisible hung in the air. The boy's music had left a mark that could not be erased by polite smiles or casual conversation. The boy stayed close to his mother. He sat quietly, his legs swinging slightly above the floor. He felt many eyes on him now, not sharp like before, but curious. It made him uncomfortable. He was not used to being noticed. He preferred corners, quiet places, and moments where he could disappear into sound. His mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Her touch was steady, but inside she felt a storm of emotions. Pride, fear, hope, and worry mixed together. She had worked in many houses before, and she knew how quickly kindness could change into trouble. She wondered if letting him play had been a mistake. Across the room, the woman of the house stood with a group of guests, laughing too loudly. She tried to act as if everything was normal, but her eyes kept drifting toward the boy. The memory of the moment replayed in her mind. The way the room had gone silent. The way people had looked at her. She did not like that feeling at all. The man of the house remained calm. He spoke little, listening more than usual. When guests approached him, they talked about business as always, but many also mentioned the boy. Some praised the talent. Others asked questions. He nodded politely, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Later that evening, when the crowd began to thin, The maid was asked to bring tea to a smaller sitting area. She hesitated, but followed instructions. Her son walked beside her, holding the edge of her sleeve. In the quieter room, only a few guests remained. The lighting was softer, the noise lower. The man of the house sat in a chair near the window. He looked at the boy and asked him simple questions. How old he was, whether he liked school, what kind of music he enjoyed. The boy answered honestly, keeping his voice low. He said he liked music that made him feel calm, music that sounded like stories. The man listened carefully, not interrupting. The woman of the house stood nearby, arms crossed lightly. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She made a comment about talent being a gift, something some people were lucky to be born with. Her words sounded pleasant, but her tone carried distance. The man nodded, then asked how the boy learned to play. The maid explained again, her voice shaking slightly. She talked about the broken keyboard, the late nights, the way her son listened to sounds and tried to copy them. She did not exaggerate. She simply told the truth. The room grew quiet once more. The man leaned back in his chair. He looked at the boy with something close to respect. He said that talent like that should not be wasted. He spoke calmly, but his words carried weight. The woman of the house shifted uncomfortably. She reminded him that they had guests, that this was not the time for such discussions. Her voice was gentle but firm. He agreed and stood up, ending the conversation for the moment. The maid and her son returned to their usual place near the kitchen. The boy felt tired, both in body and mind. The excitement of the evening slowly drained away, leaving behind a strange emptiness. He wondered if this night would be remembered or forgotten. When the gathering finally ended, the house returned to its quiet state. Guests left with polite goodbyes. Laughter faded. The piano stood alone again, silent. The maid stayed late to clean. Her son sat on a small stool, half asleep. When everything was finished, they left through the side door, stepping into the cool night air. On the way home, neither of them spoke much. The city lights flickered past them. The boy rested his head against his mother's arm. At home, he took out his broken keyboard and pressed a few keys softly. The sounds were uneven but familiar. He played the same tune again, slower this time. His mother listened from the doorway, her heart heavy but hopeful. The next morning, the maid returned to the house alone. She had left her son with a neighbor, unsure of what kind of day awaited her. As she worked, she felt nervous. Every sound made her jump. Later in the day, she was asked to come into the sitting room. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. She feared bad news. She feared being told not to bring her son again. The man of the house was there. He asked her to sit down. He spoke kindly, asking about her life, her work, and her son's education. No one had asked her such questions before. He said he had been thinking about the boy since the gathering. He believed the child needed proper guidance and opportunity. He mentioned music lessons, schooling, and support. The maid felt tears rise again. She did not know what to say. Gratitude and fear battled inside her. She worried about strings attached, about promises that could be taken away. The woman of the house entered the room during the conversation. She listened quietly this time. Her expression was hard to read. She reminded them that generosity should be handled carefully, that boundaries were important. Her words were measured, but her discomfort was clear. The man nodded. He agreed that care was needed. He said nothing would happen without discussion. But his tone made one thing clear. The boy's future mattered. The maid left the room with mixed feelings. She returned to her work, her mind racing. That evening, she told her son everything. He listened carefully, his eyes wide. The idea of lessons, of learning more, felt unreal. He was excited but also afraid. Change had always meant risk. As night fell, the boy lay awake, listening to distant city sounds. His fingers moved gently in the air, tracing invisible keys. Somewhere far away, the piano waited. And the woman of the house lay awake too, staring at the ceiling, forced to face a truth she had tried to laugh away. The quiet house held many thoughts that night, all moving toward a future no one could fully see yet. The days after the gathering felt different for everyone involved. Nothing had been officially decided, yet the house carried a quiet tension, like a question waiting for an answer. The piano remained in its place, polished and silent, but it no longer felt like just an object. It had become a reminder. The maid continued her work as usual. She cleaned, cooked, and followed instructions with the same care she always had. But inside her, something had changed. She felt watched, not in a harsh way, but with attention she was not used to. Sometimes the man of the house would ask her simple questions about her son. Other times, staff members treated her with a little more respect, unsure of what the future held. Her son stayed home during these days. He tried to focus on schoolwork, but his mind often drifted. He thought about the piano, the large room, and the way the music had filled the air. At night, he still played on his broken keyboard, practicing softly. His fingers moved with more confidence now, guided by a new sense of purpose. The woman of the house struggled the most. She kept herself busy with meetings, lunches, and social calls, but her thoughts returned again and again to that evening. She replayed her words in her mind. At first, she tried to defend herself. It was just a joke, she told herself. People joked like that all the time. But something about the way the boy had played would not leave her alone. The honesty in the sound, the silence that followed, the looks from the guests. She did not like feeling exposed. One afternoon, she walked into the living room and stopped in front of the piano. She had taken lessons when she was younger but had never loved it. To her, music had always been something to show, not something to feel. She pressed a key. The sound echoed softly. She pressed another, then stopped. For the first time, she wondered what it felt like to sit there without fear, without pride, and simply play. That evening, the man of the house asked her to join him for a quiet dinner. There were no guests, no staff nearby. Just the two of them and the soft sound of cutlery against plates. He spoke gently. He said he had been thinking a lot about the boy, about talent, responsibility, and opportunity. He believed that when someone was given much, they should also give back. She listened in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. She said that helping was one thing, but crossing lines was another. She worried about what people would say, about expectations, about control. He nodded. He said he understood her concerns. But he also said something that made her pause. He said that the boy had not asked for anything, that all he had done was play. That night, she could not sleep. The next morning, the maid was surprised to hear a request she had never received before. She was asked to bring her son to the house that afternoon. Her heart raced. She wondered if this was good news or bad. She prepared her son carefully, fixing his clothes and smoothing his hair. He sensed her nervousness and stayed quiet. When they arrived, they were led to the living room. The piano waited there, just as before. The man of the house was present. So was the woman. The boy stood still, unsure of where to look. The maid kept her hands folded, ready for anything. The man spoke first. He said they wanted to talk about the boy's future. He explained that they believed talent needed support. He offered to arrange proper music lessons and help with schooling. The maid listened, hardly breathing. Gratitude flooded her, but fear followed close behind. She asked careful questions. She wanted to know what was expected in return. The man shook his head. He said this was not about repayment. It was about doing what was right. The woman of the house remained quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. Her voice was softer than before. She admitted that her words at the gathering had been thoughtless. She said she had not meant to hurt anyone. The boy looked at her, surprised. He had not expected an apology. She continued, saying that seeing him play had reminded her of things she had forgotten. She did not excuse herself, but she did not fully explain either. It was not perfect, but it was real. The maid felt tears well up again. She nodded, accepting the words. Then came a pause. The woman took a deep breath and said something unexpected. She said she wanted to keep her promise. The room went still. She clarified quickly. She said not in the way people might think. not as a joke, but as a responsibility. She spoke about adoption carefully, seriously, and with conditions. She said it would take time, trust, and agreement. The maid felt her knees weaken. The word echoed in her mind. She looked at her son, then back at the couple. The man placed a hand on his wife's arm. He said this was a big step and should not be rushed. He suggested starting with support, guidance, and time. The woman nodded. She agreed. The boy stood quietly, trying to understand. The idea of leaving his mother frightened him. But he also felt the weight of possibility. The maid spoke at last. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was not. She said her son belonged with her, that any help must respect that. The woman listened. For once, she did not interrupt. The man smiled gently and said that was understood. They agreed to move slowly. Lessons would begin. School support would follow. Trust would be built, not demanded. When the meeting ended, the boy was asked if he would like to play again. He nodded. He sat at the piano, this time without laughter, without whispers, only listening ears. He played softly, not to impress, but to speak. The woman listened differently now, not as someone above him, but as someone learning. The maid watched, her heart full and aching at the same time. Outside, the day moved on like any other. Inside, lives were quietly shifting. Time moved forward in small, steady steps. Nothing changed all at once, but everything slowly became different. The boy began visiting the house twice a week for music lessons. A quiet teacher came in the afternoons, patient and calm, treating him like any other student. There were no jokes, no audience, no pressure. Just notes, mistakes, and learning. At first, the boy felt nervous sitting at the piano again. The memory of that night still lived inside him. But as days passed, the fear softened. His fingers grew stronger, his ears sharper. He learned the names of notes he had always felt but never known. His mother watched from a distance whenever she could. She never interfered. She simply stood quietly, grateful and alert at the same time. She knew kindness could disappear as quickly as it arrived. Still, she allowed herself to hope. School support followed. Books, fees, and extra help were arranged. For the first time, the boy did not feel like he was always behind. He began to raise his hand in class. He began to believe he belonged. The house also changed. The woman of the house watched these changes closely. At first, she stayed distant, observing rather than joining. But sometimes she paused near the piano room, listening. She heard progress. She heard effort. She heard feeling. One afternoon, she entered the room quietly and sat down. She did not speak. She simply listened until the lesson ended. When the boy stood up, unsure, she thanked him. Just that. Nothing more. The boy nodded. He did not know what to say, but he felt something ease inside his chest. Weeks turned into months. Trust grew slowly, like a plant watered carefully. There were boundaries, conversations, and moments of doubt. Nothing was rushed. The man of the house remained steady. He checked in, asked questions, and made sure promises were kept. To him, this was not about praise or image. It was about responsibility. One evening, after a small private performance for the teacher and his mother, the boy was asked to stay behind. His heart raced. The woman and man sat across from him and his mother. The room was quiet but warm. They spoke honestly, about care, about the future, about options. They explained that adoption was not something to be decided lightly, that it required trust from everyone involved. They said they respected the bond between mother and son above all else. Then they offered a choice. They proposed long-term guardianship with full support, education, and opportunity, while keeping his mother fully involved in every part of his life. Nothing would be taken away, only added. The room was silent. The maid felt tears run down her face. Not from fear this time, but from relief. She had expected pressure. Instead, she felt respect. She looked at her son. He looked back at her. She asked him what he wanted. The boy spoke softly but clearly. He said he wanted to keep playing music. He wanted to keep learning. And he wanted his mother to always be close. The woman nodded. The man smiled. They agreed. Life settled into a new rhythm. The boy continued his lessons. He practiced daily. Music became his voice, his escape, his strength. He played not for applause but because it made sense of the world. His mother's life improved too. Her work hours became lighter. She was treated with dignity. Her opinions were heard. She was no longer invisible. One evening, a small gathering was held. Not a party, just a few people who mattered. The piano waited. The boy walked toward it calmly this time. No shaking hands. No burning face. He sat down and played. The music filled the room again, but it felt different now. Carried growth, not pain. Confidence, not fear. The woman listened with closed eyes. When the last note faded, she did not clap right away. She simply breathed. Later that night, she approached the boy and his mother. She apologized again, this time without excuses. She said she had learned something important, that power should never be used to make others feel small. The maid thanked her, not because it was expected but because it was honest. Years passed. The boy grew taller. His hands stretched across more keys. His music deepened. He performed on bigger stages, but he never forgot the first piano that truly heard him. He returned to that house often, not as a servant's child, but as family. And sometimes, when people asked how it all began, he smiled softly and said it started with a moment meant to shame him. But it ended with understanding.